Welcome back, everybody. This is the second video of the night, and it is starting the breakdown of the language and literacy standard. The very first strand in that standard is language. And just like the last video, we're going to make sure that you are commenting on each of the videos that you watch tonight. The question to answer and kind of keep in mind as you're watching this is just what are some ways that you can encourage and practice language with your kids. And there are two different kinds of language that we're going to talk about. There's the receptive language, which is listening and following directions, and then expressive language, which is speaking. So within that first strand of language, there are three basic concepts. Those concepts are, again, receptive language understanding, expressive language and communication skills, and then vocabulary. So receptive language basically means that children can listen to what you are saying or what is being read to them, and they understand what it means. It's demonstrated when we ask a child to do something and they respond appropriately. If I ask you to take off your shoes and you bring me a banana, that's not really showing me that you have receptive language understanding. You clearly don't know what I asked you to do. So it is very important, and it's definitely something that's crucial once they start getting to the school age as far as following directions and being successful in school. So again, receptive language is just that ability to understand and comprehend language that is heard or read. It is basically built up over lots of active engagement in conversations and watching the people around them and listening to the adults around them, listening to their peers, and just kind of taking in everything that's happening around them at all times. And it's really learned through robust exposure to tons of language, tons of talking, tons of language-based activities. A lot of the stuff that you're doing is language-based, and you may not even realize it. So, interesting thing about this receptive language is that it happens kind of in a process where these pathways in the brain, these connections, are being laid out like a roadmap, basically. And as they develop, they follow like a very specific path, where first they are going to be developing to support vision and hearing. So this is like those early neurological functions that are happening when we have an infant and they're just beginning to start using their vision and hearing for the first time. Those pathways are laid down first, and then that lays the groundwork for those early language skills that come later. So if you have a child that is in that earlier range, because these standards are for 3 to 5, they're working on these neurological, the hearing, the vision, those are the things that your kids are doing, but that's all part of laying the groundwork for the language skills that they're going to be using. And it's really interesting because at this young age, this 3 to 5 window, the 0 to 5 window, kids are highly susceptible to learning new languages. That's the language acquisition stage in life. So it is easier for a 2-year-old to learn a second language than it is for a 20-year-old, because the brain is laying out all those connections, but as it realizes that some of them are not being used anymore, it starts to prune them back out to kind of streamline the brain and make it more effective. So it's kind of like a use it or lose it kind of thing. And so obviously we want to use it and have our kids using it as much as possible, because that sets them up for long-term success, and the more pathways the better. So again, those infant and toddler guidelines, they focus more on developmental milestones. So when you look at this chart right here, and I realize it's probably too small for most of you on your phones, but It will be available as part of the resources for you. Um, anyway, as you look at this chart, it starts with birth to 3. And the very first thing is reacting to loud sounds. They quiet to familiar voices and sounds. So again, that's very hearing based. These are those neurological pathways are being laid down first. And then they begin to start looking at the person who is making these sounds, or looking towards the noises and turning their heads towards the sound. And then they start making, cooing and speech-like sounds, and it just kind of continues to snowball from there. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at this chart is it's not a very cut and dry. Like, there is a very wide range of what is normal when it comes to language acquisition. So if your child's a little ahead or a little behind, that's not really a cause for concern. Not just yet, anyway. If you start having concerns that there could be something wrong, or your child is not, speaking when you think they should be, we have resources to put you in touch with. We work with the Arizona Cooperative Extension. The ASU Cooperative Extension, and they will actually, come out and do hearing and vision screenings. Now, obviously, that is pre-coronavirus life, but I know that they are still working with people. So that's a resource we'll also have for you at the end. It is actually how I found out my oldest daughter was blind as a bat and needed glasses. And we had some pretty serious concerns about my youngest, where we knew her language was delayed. We didn't know how much, but it was definitely not happening as fast as our oldest daughter. And so they came out, and indeed they were able to figure out that she was delayed. However, they do those hearing and vision screenings to kind of rule out the that portion of the issue. If I were to find out that she had hearing issues, it would have all made sense, because, of course, she can't speak because she's not hearing any language. So how is she going to learn language? So it was something that we utilized, and I'm a huge advocate for. So nonverbal communication is kind of where all children start. So what a baby might use to get your attention when they need something is, of course, crying. So that's them making sounds. But there's a whole range of nonverbal communication that they utilize to get what they want. Now, a lot of times you'll see them walk up and just kind of grunt at you and point at something, and we go, oh yes, you must want a snack. Here we go, let's go get you a snack. But there's a reason why we don't want to just assume we know what they want, and we're going to talk about that. I'll mention it again in a little bit. So here's some nonverbal communication happening in this picture. You can see that my youngest here is communicating to Hadley. She is offering her a pretzel, and bam, Hadley takes the pretzel. She knew what she wanted her to do, and off she goes. She eats that pretzel. So this is effective communication that's happening. So when we talk about the indicators that you might see, again, it might look really overwhelming, but I have simplified it down for the sake of this PowerPoint. But basically, they engage actively and demonstrate understanding, and they participate in tons of different language activities like finger plays and songs and conversations and stories. And then they also follow directions, one step, then two, then multiple, 3 or more. So play some Simon Says, because that's a good way to practice that following direction skill. And it's definitely something that's crucial when they get to that school age. So, when children are constantly taking in language and listening, it is a bunch of input all happening at once. and things will stand out more and become more important and more valuable when they are associated with pleasant and stimulating, unique experiences. So, for example, if it's something really enjoyable that you are doing while this conversation is happening, then it's something that's going to be more strongly uh, more strongly remembered when it comes to the language that was involved. So all of those experiences that we have, they're called our prior knowledge, and they kind of like go into this big bank of experience and the language that happened during those experiences, and they make it easier to understand new experiences that happen. So, for example, here is Cora, and she is chilling and enjoying some time with the cat. That moment right there makes it easier for her the first time she sees a lion in real life, obviously at the zoo. But she's able to make a connection because that's a cat and this is a cat. Boom, that's a connection that her brain had. It was already in there. She doesn't have to actively go look for it. Her brain just already pulls it up because it notices the similarity, the connection. So that means that field trips are more than just fun. And of course, I'm using this term field trips real loosely, especially now. But field trips could be going to the grocery store, or to all our providers out there who feel guilty for going to the park every day. Don't. That's language acquisition that's happening during that time. You're just building up their prior knowledge. The more fun in the experience, the more language rich that memory is going to be. And it's going to continue building up that prior knowledge that we talked about. So here they are at a zoo, and my daughter still refers back to this. So this would be 3, 5. I mean, she's probably 4 in this picture right here. So she still refers back to the time we went to the zoo and we went to the little park that was there. She absolutely internalized that particular part of the memory. Now, she didn't really pay much attention to the actual zoo itself, but the park at the zoo, now that's in there forever. And all of these experiences, again, they're adding to that knowledge base, which in turn adds to our usable vocabulary and our vocabulary that we can understand. So make all of your explorations extra memorable. I think sometimes we're a little too stiff. We're a little too concerned about what other people might think. When we really truly let loose and get a little silly with it, get a little crazy with it, you're going to create even more powerful memories and more language-rich memories for your kids. So this is one that I particularly liked. It was the first time I let the kids use magnifying glasses. And I didn't tell them what they did. I just said the word magnifying glasses, and I gave them to them, and off they go. Well, Cora turns and looks at Hadley, and Hadley turns and looks at Cora, and both of them have one gigantic eyeball behind the mirror of behind the lens of that magnifying glass, and it was the funniest thing in the world to them. Pretty soon we had them having 2 different magnifying glasses. They're wearing them like goggles walking around. So it was one of those things that it was such a powerful experience, and it was such a small thing, and yet they're going to remember it for a long time. So when we come to concept 2, this is now where we start using all of those words, all of those experiences, all of those memories. That's all in there. Now we're actually spitting them out in the words that we say. So expressive language and communication skills, again, they're gonna develop that language by engaging in conversations, listening and responding to stories and rhymes and songs, all things that we're already doing. It's something that is naturally happening all day long. One thing I want to point out, kids that are encouraged and really like prompted to share their personal ideas, their experiences, their feelings, they actually use more complex language. So the more we tell kids that their opinions and their thoughts matter, the more we get them to share those with us, the more their language actually develops. So this is one of those indicators now where I have like kind of stripped away all the extra details and broken it down to, they want you to communicate their needs, their wants, their ideas through 3 to 5 word sentences, and obviously speak clearly and understandably while they're expressing them. The thing about that is no child starts in a 3 to 5 word sentence. It literally starts with nonverbal communication, then 1 word, then then they get to 2 words where, first it's water and then it's, water please, or more water if you're not doing manners just yet. But it is something that I noticed when I was doing home visits. And this here in the blue, they recognize when the person that they're talking to, their listener, doesn't understand, and they vary the amount of information to clarify the message. That's a lot of words just to say that they find a way to help you understand what they're trying to communicate to you. So if they are pointing at their cup and grunting, and you don't understand what they're saying, they're going to find a way to kind of make you understand. So if we, and I know I as a parent do this all the time, but we anticipate their needs, and we just kind of automatically give them what they want because we know what they want, and it just becomes innate where we're automatically, okay, you wanted water, here you go, here's your water. But if you slow down and you make them and encourage and prompt them to help you understand, they're going to work a little harder to convey that idea to you. If you just automatically know what they want, they have no reason to give you extra information. So if you've got a kid that's not really talking as much as you want, this is something that you should try to work on. Pretend you don't understand what they're saying to you, even though we know that you do, but they will work harder to make you understand them. So one portion of this expressive language is kind of doing like what's socially appropriate, and making these culturally relevant responses. When I am talking to a child, I want them to look me in the eye. I want them to not interrupt me, so we're taking turns, and I want them to use, appropriate tone when they're talking to me. And that's kind of something that has to be taught to them and modeled and practiced sometimes. So when my oldest needs to apologize to her sister and she says, "I'm sorry," I think we all know that she's not actually sorry. And it's one of those times that I always have to say, it's not just the words you say, it's how you say them. And that's something that I don't think we often think about. So a way to practice those responses, those appropriate, socially normal interactions, is through gameplay. And I'm sure most children, like mine, the first time you play a game and you beat them in that game, they're going to throw a big fit, right? Oh, but I didn't win. That's a skill that's going to require some practice. You have to teach them how to, follow rules, how to cooperate, how to take turns, and then, of course, how to be a gracious loser or, a kind winner. You're not rubbing it in their faces. Great way to practice all of those skills are with games. Board games, physical games, any kind of game. Another way to encourage more expressive language, and I know I'm super guilty of this, Nasir here makes this amazing creation, and I look at it and I go, oh wow, that's amazing. I love the plane that you made. And he looks at me like I'm an idiot, and he says, it's not a plane, it's, a floating airship or whatever he plans on calling it. And actually, that's exactly what happened in this scenario here. And I cannot for the life of me remember what the thing was actually called, but those black things on the bottom of the wings right here were like boosters. And he wanted to tell me all about it, how it wasn't actually a plane. It was some, kind of like a spaceship. So don't assume you know what they made. Don't assume you know what they drew. Because a lot of times, the things they create might not look like what you think that they are. It's important to give them that freedom of choice and expression when you're doing art with them. Again, kind of like when earlier I had mentioned children that express their opinions and that we encourage them to share their thoughts and ideas. That's the same thing here. Rather than me telling them what it is or telling them what to make, I just give them the tools and let them make it. And you'd be surprised the variations that they come up with. So when your child creates or draws a masterpiece like this thing in my hand right here, instead of assuming that you know what it is, if you do know what it is, let them explain it to you. Same thing as a picture. The first time you look at a drawing that your child is really proud of and you say, oh wow, I really like the elephant you drew, and they tell you that that is not an elephant, that's actually you and daddy, or, it gets a little bit, no artist wants to have their work insulted. Alrighty, so are all workbooks and worksheets bad? It might seem like this is a little bit random, but it's tied into the language portion of this. So what they're doing here is not actually workbooks. They're actually doing dramatic play. They wanted to play school. Of course, these are my preschool kids. They came to my house for preschool, but they wanted to play school because they didn't know they were at school already. So, of course, me being the fantastic preschool teacher that I am, I brought out some stuff for them to do some school. And they were doing the workbooks, which, I mean, great. But it was such a special experience because it wasn't the workbook that they were doing. They were actively playing that they were students. And dramatic play and language always go together. So, there's different language that happens with all the different themes of a dramatic play. So here I've got, some fairy princesses and a fairy prince, and here there's some archaeologists. And they are two totally different conversations that are happening while this play is happening. So the more variation in your dramatic play, the more language you can actually get in it. All right, and lastly, we have vocabulary, and this is one that I'm a big fan of. One thing that always is disappointing to me is when people talk down to children, because believe it or not, children of all ages are very intelligent, and they can understand and they can utilize big, robust vocabulary words. I always have talked to my children as though they were adults, and when they started talking, they really had an impressive vocabulary. I mean, my oldest literally started talking in paragraphs. So, vocabulary is again, learned by frequent opportunities with language, listening, talking, reading, responding, engaging in meaningful conversations. So don't just talk at a surface level, like really get in there and have conversations. It's kind of like they know when you're not really into it. So try to be authentic, because that becomes a meaningful conversation. They need these opportunities to play with and experiment with language in different settings. Just like there's totally different language for princess fairy play versus archaeologist versus kitchen versus veterinarian clinic. They need a lot of different opportunities and experiences, and that in turn broadens their vocabulary. They need opportunities to be exposed to unique and rare words. If they're never exposed to them, they're never going to use them. So I always encourage you to upgrade your words. Ugh, I can't tell you how much I despise good job. There are so many more beautiful words than good. Amazing, astonishing, stupendous. My kids love that one. Stupendous, marvelous, fantastic. Just really think of, more colorful vocabulary. This is my favorite. Similes and metaphors. Obviously, you're not going to use similes saying, oh, okay, Amelia, this is a simile. But it's a way of comparing things to make them more clear. So, similes are when I'm comparing something using the words like or as. So I crawl like a caterpillar. Now, crawling like a caterpillar is very different than crawling like a baby. So if I were to say crawl like a caterpillar, I hope you envision me laying down on the ground doing the worm across my living room. And if I say crawl like a baby, I hope you envision me on all fours crawling like a baby. So this makes their language so much more powerful, and it automatically taps into that prior knowledge, all that knowledge that you were building up with all those amazing unique experiences earlier. Now they're coming out in the words and the vocabulary that we're saying. And you might notice, Mommy, you smell like magnets. This literally happened 2 days ago. My youngest, 4-year-old daughter, love her. We were cuddling on the couch. I had just got done mowing the lawn, and I come in, and apparently I smelled like magnets. I've never smelled the magnet, but she looks up at me and she says, your arm smells like magnets. And I'm like, what? Well, it actually did. It did smell like magnets. I don't know. Apparently when I was sweating outside cutting the grass, it made me smell like magnets, which is like a metallic smell. I have no idea. But sure enough, she brought me a magnet, and I smelled like magnets. I'm not going to lie. I smelled like magnets. And I never would have known had she have just said, you smell. But now I know. I sweat and smell like a magnet, apparently. I love it. All right, so one way to kind of boost that vocabulary, and we talked about like giving them the opportunity to use rare and unique words. One of the ways you can do that is by giving them new, unique, like sensory experiences. So here you can see what looks like utter chaos, but that's my kids playing with rice and beans. I think there were some lentils in there. But, the Play-Doh that the kids mix, and it becomes that poopy brown color? Well, I had a bunch of that poopy brown mixed up Play-Doh that I can't stand, and I didn't know what to do with it, but I couldn't throw it away. So I brought out a bunch of our sensory tub stuff, and I gave them the Play-Doh and the clay that they could mix together, and they started to combine it. And the conversations that take place when you try to describe something that you can't quite put your finger on, that you don't necessarily have a word for, it's pretty incredible the kinds of things that they come up with. They come up with things like, it smells like magnets, or it feels like, marbles in a beanbag. Just all kinds of descriptions that you would never think of if you don't try these kinds of things. So inspired by that, I was teaching shapes one day, and Nasir, the boy with his hand in the box there, he was struggling with differentiating between two of the shapes. And so I was trying to find a way to help make it make sense. And I came up with this idea of putting the shapes in the mystery box. And so first I would show him a shape, and I would ask him to find that same shape within the box. And it actually brought out this whole tactile experience to what I was describing. He now, instead of, having to try to think of which shape had three corners, he had to take his mind out of it. He had to put his hand in there, and he had to think with his senses. And it became one of our favorite things to do. You can actually see in the background there's like a shoe and a corn cob. Those were probably in the mystery box at one time, because we didn't just do shapes. We would stick all kinds of toys in there. And there's a difference between me describing it to you while you try to find it, and you putting your hand in there to feel something, and you describing it so we guess what it is. If he describes something that has a bunch of bumps all over it, it's probably the corn and not the sandal. So that's a perfect example of using that rich vocabulary. So in the indicators there, it talks about figuring out the meaning of unfamiliar words and concepts, using that context, using things around them, pictures in the book, or that prior knowledge. Also, using category labels, thinking of things like where they belong. So if I were to say fruit, I know that a banana is a fruit. But if I hold up a car, is a car a fruit? No, it's not. It's going to be transportation. So when we think of like where this belongs, or what are things like this, what are other fruits, it helps to clarify things that are maybe a little difficult to understand. And then also demonstrating understanding of positional and directional words. This is big on following directions, and it was definitely mentioned in my math training as well. But helping kids understand things like in and out, on top of and below, over, under, next to. These positional words also help them make sense of the world and help them figure out the different things that they're encountering. Here's an example of how we practiced our sorting. I had a bunch of gigantic pictures of like items, and you can see that we've got this kind of all spread out because I wanted to make it like a very gross motor type of activity where they had to move while they were actually participating. The point of the activity, though, was that I would hand them a giant circle, or they would take a giant circle, and they'd run it across the room to these boards here. And the boards are the different categories. So we've got animals, we've got clothing, colors, and I don't know what's in the background there, but probably, something similar. And so if I give you a goldfish, we know that's going to the animals. And if I give you a hat, that's going to go to clothing. If I give you, purple, that's a color. So that kind of helps them organize these vocabulary that they come across. And even at a young age, our kids are capable of this. So here's Olivia, and she's less than 2 in this picture. And I had given her a bunch of stickers of planes. And I won't lie, this was an activity that I was just giving her because I was doing something with the rest of the kids. So just off the screen, off the picture here, I'm doing an activity with the other kids, but I needed something to keep her occupied. And so I gave her a bunch of these stickers, and then they were all planes. And so I said, oh, these are all things with wings, or I think I said things that can fly. And she put the stickers on the board for quite a while, just, put the planes up there, and I thought that was it. And a little bit later, she comes back to me, and she's got a stuffed bird. Now, this is in that time period where she was not using a lot of language, and we were definitely concerned. I wasn't sure what was going on. But when she brought that bird to me, and she was, holding it up to me, I realized, oh my goodness, she made a connection between things that can fly, and I gave her a bunch of planes, and here she comes over with a bird. That's a thing that can fly. And I mean, I was like, yes. And it really was reassuring to me to know that she understood what I was talking about and wasn't just putting stickers on a board to put stickers up, It was like that moment where I realized how powerful her understanding of what I was saying was, because she could follow multiple directions. She knew what I was talking about, but she just wasn't talking. So here's that question again. There was tons of ideas, but what are some ways that you can encourage and practice language with your kids? And again, there's two kinds, that receptive language and their expressive language. So share your thoughts, comment on this particular video right here. Make sure that you comment on the post, and then we will be coming back for the next video at 7:30, and that's going to cover Strand 2 literacy.